and for those of you watching at home as well. My name is Chris Barnard. I'm the president of the American Conservation Coalition Action. We're the largest conservative environmental organization in the country with over 40,000 members, and we're really excited to be hosting this presidential candidate series with the New Hampshire College Republicans and the New Hampshire Young Republicans, and tonight is our last installment of this series before a very busy week here in New Hampshire. And I just want to thank, especially tonight, Governor Sununu for being here with us, and also just to quickly tell you that the idea for this whole series came in conversation with the governor, and he and I agree that it's so important for candidates to speak directly to the next generation about the issues that matter to young people. And so we have 3 topics lined up for tonight, which are the economy, the environment, and education, which polling routinely show is extremely important to the next generation and to young people. And so we're very grateful that we've had multiple candidates come through to talk about this, and the governor to be talking tonight on behalf of Ambassador Nikki Haley, who is of course in Iowa, to talk about these issues to all of you tonight. Here's how this is going to go. Like I said, 3 topics. Will be about 10 to 15 minutes of discussion on each between a moderator and the governor. Then we'll have about 10 minutes of questions from each of you, so prepare your questions. And then we'll cycle through the moderators and then get us all out of here in time. So without further ado, let me welcome the governor to the stage. Awesome. And we're going to have Virginia from the New Hampshire Young Republicans kick us off.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, Chris.
Hello, hello. I just got off, I just did an interview with Erin Burnett in the parking lot.
Was that you?
Yes, the weird. So everyone, sorry, I'm interrupting your. Everyone always thinks when they see him on the media that I'm in studio, but usually I'm in a creepy white van, like outside my driveway or something. And there's one sitting right out there. So you just open up the back of the van. There's a camera here. There's lights there. They have a backdrop. It looks like I'm in the studio, but I'm just in a van, and technology allows me to do that. So Erin Burnett says hello.
Hello. Well, Governor, thank you for helping us kind of create this forum. It really was your idea. We sent an invitation to practically every candidate, but only a handful had RSVP'd, particularly Nikki Haley, Ambassador Haley. And so the topic that we were discussing specifically for the topics is the 3 E's. It's the economy, the environment, and education, and they all tie in together so tightly. They're separate, but they also are so tightly wound that you can't separate them. So on the topic of the economy, particularly for Ambassador Haley, it's such a big topic, and there's such a cause and effect to whatever you do. Where do you start? Where do you
Sure.
think Ambassador Haley starts?
Well,
with
so
the economy?
Ambassador Haley and I think have a similar approach, right? So first, we're both governors, she was a governor, I am a governor. But in terms of economics, I think we're both kind of fiscal hawks. The one thing I will put her above all else, she's an accountant. Right, she was an actual accountant, so she understands that. Again, sometimes you have to make tough decisions, but if you don't get the economics right, especially in a leadership position, everything else falls apart. Right, but when you do get it right, that's how you create opportunities with balancing budgets, surplus budgets that allows you to invest in new programs, try new things, challenge your departments to think outside the box. If you're always managing from a place of fiscal deficit in government, then you can't. It's so hard to try anything new. In fact, if anything, you're pulling back stuff that maybe is just getting out of the box. You tend to fall back on programs that have existed, but you don't have to get a new program and a new thing started. You need some of those extra dollars. You don't do it by raising taxes. You do it by driving the economy, right? We here in New Hampshire, we don't have sales tax. We don't have income tax. I just got rid of the interest in dividends, right? That went from 5%. It's going down to 0, which is great. We've cut business taxes. And guess what? We have more money than ever before, right? Revenue keeps increasing. Why? Because businesses keep piling in here. We've made it a place where everyone wants to be. So she and I share a lot of that same philosophy in that when you drive new jobs, when you drive new economic opportunities for families or for businesses or whatever it is, your opportunities fiscally, you can cut taxes but still have more opportunities to invest in something new like mental health programs or opioid programs or whatever it is. So you can try all this new stuff. You can find things, new ways to do stuff, not by growing government, by just expanding your opportunities. But it all starts with a balanced budget and fiscal discipline.
You really took away my second question, which is you called Ambassador Haley a live free or die candidate, and that really emphasizes the New Hampshire way, and that coincides with the New Hampshire advantage, which is no sales tax and no income tax. As governor, you've had a lot of experience with the White House over the
Sure.
course of your term as governor, and as well as
Two very different White Houses, by the way. Yeah, between
So-
Trump and Biden. Yeah.
Why is it important to have someone in the White House strong on the economy, and why does Ambassador
Yeah.
Haley fit that?
So the states actually do a pretty good job fiscally, for the most part, as long as you don't live in California or New York, right? Most states have a balanced budget amendment, right? They have to come up with some form of a balanced budget. Maybe their revenue predictions are off or whatever it is, but states have to basically justify to their legislatures and to the governors and legislatures and vice versa that something is balanced, that we're being responsible with the dollars. Washington is the only organization that doesn't have to do that. Right? And we talk about that a lot. Businesses have to do it. You personally have to do it. Most state governments have to do it, but Washington doesn't. Because we haven't had a president up there for a while now that really has prioritized that and has been not just, here's my budget to Congress, I hope you get it done. That's not how you do it. As you know, you've been in the legislature, you have to work, right? You can't get everything you want. And leadership out of the governor's office to a legislature or from the president to Congress really does matter in terms of negotiating this stuff out, making tough decisions, and getting these types of things done. Trump was the worst. I mean, in terms of fiscal discipline, there's no Republican in history that's worse than him, right? And we shouldn't be surprised at that. His entire business model is on borrowing money, and bankruptcies are okay, and he kind of works through them. He knows the system, and he's done that very well in the private side of things. So when it came to him borrowing $7 trillion more in just one term, over borrowing by $7 trillion, for him, he's like, that's his philosophy. But guys, you're all paying for that. And you're going to pay for that. I'm looking at college students. You guys are going to pay for that a lot more than even I am, and my kids are going to pay for it even more. Somebody has to pay that money back. Right? And every dollar you're paying that money back, every dollar you're paying in interest is another dollar that isn't going to education, that isn't going to good programs, that isn't going to smarter, more innovative things. So to have the leadership of an accountant who knows, who has success working with legislatures before. This was Trump's other problem. He didn't really understand how to work with the legislature. He had never worked in the public sphere before. I mean, the guy literally thought the Congress would just work for him. That's not the way it works. Even when Republicans led Congress, that's not the way it works. And when you don't get something done, you go back and try again. You negotiate things out. You keep working at it. I mean, I've had to balance and negotiate budgets right up until the last minute. It's hard. It's really hard. You got to spend a lot of political capital, a lot of effort, emphasis doing it. You got to give up a lot to get a lot sometimes. But at the end of the day, that's the hard part of the job. He was never willing to do the hard part. Nikki's been successful doing that. And again, just to have somebody from that fiscal discipline mindset, but also knows how to get stuff done and drive still a strong economy without raising taxes, that's a gold mine of opportunity for the Republican Party, and more importantly for the entire country.
So the topic of this whole program is called the future of conservatism, and conservatism, it kind of can be split into two parts. There's the physical conservatism, and then there's the conservatism of kind of other beliefs. Why is physical conservatism so important, and does that draw young people into the Republican Party?
What do you mean by physical? Sorry.
Physical responsibility. That physical conservative. I'm physically conservative.
Oh, fiscally.
Yes.
They said physical. I'm like, wow, what's a physical? Is that a new young term? The physical conservative. He only does 3 reps at the gym or something. So if you want to talk about, I'm going to use the examples and pat ourselves on the back a little bit here in New Hampshire. Let's talk about the opioid crisis, right? So when I came in, we were piling tons, the little bit of money that we had. It kept increasing, but it was the little bit of money that we had going to that crisis. We were number 2 in the country with opioid and fentanyl deaths, and we were doing it in the same old system the way it was built in the 1970s and 80s, right? And the numbers of deaths were skyrocketing. If you keep putting more money into a system that isn't designed to get the result you want, it's like you're pushing harder, but with more money, but you're pushing harder in the wrong direction, right? You got to have the courage to say, okay, we have to whiteboard this thing. We have to rebuild the system in a whole fundamentally different way. And then we can put a lot of money behind that, but it has to be based on metrics and results and what we're getting. So we did that. here. We blew up the system, and it was hard. We got a lot of flack from the nonprofits and things of that nature. We needed a lot more money to do it because you're starting a whole new system, a whole new way of doing things. We put a lot of emphasis in rural access to care, specifically around opioids and drug treatment and recovery services, because we found the addiction rates in the North Country were 4 times that than Manchester. Everyone thinks all the crisis was in Manchester. That's where the total number of deaths and overdoses was happening. But in terms of the rate, and so why was that? Why were kids and adults in rural areas having such a much harder time? They had no access to care. So yes, we needed a more money to be able to do that. Well, that only happens, we were only able to try that new thing and try that new program because we had good fiscal discipline. We were fiscally conservative here, which gave us opportunity there, right? If you don't do that, then when you need a new opportunity, you just go borrow money like the federal government does, right? That's a really bad way of doing things. 34 trillion. That's a real number, right? That's like $3 a day for every day that the earth has existed. I mean, like since the beginning of the universe or something. I mean, it's like ridiculous if you think of it that way. So there's an amazing opportunities that can be presented to you with new ways of doing things and new technologies and all that. But if you don't have the money to do it, if you're not fiscally disciplined in the beginning, you can't push yourselves to try the new things and, again, stay ahead of it, stay progressive, I don't like that word progressive, but, stay on top of, again, challenging yourself to constantly get better results, not just settle for the same old system.
So Ambassador Haley has both an internal economic plan and also an external economic plan in the sense of America as an international power. What's kind of her position on that sense of America as it's a space of our economic is a part of America.
Sure.
So it's something that we can't just ignore.
Absolutely. Look, I think Ambassador Haley and I both agree, you bring world peace through America's strength. That doesn't mean you go to war. That doesn't mean you're throwing troops on the ground all over. No, just the opposite, right? By making sure that America is back as kind of a leader of the world. We don't, the way she puts it, she says, when she's at the UN, she got the kick me sign off our back, right? America has to be respected. Our allies want us to be strong. Our allies are begging for us to be strong on the national stage. Our enemies are scared to death that we will be strong. That happens not just because you have a strong military, that's a part of it, of course, but it happens because you have economic leverage, right? You're supporting your allies economically when you can. That happens because you become focusing on energy. You have to be energy dominant, and we have the opportunity to do that, right? So that doesn't mean you don't do renewables and you don't focus on transitions and all that sort of thing. That's a completely different argument. But by being strong in terms of with how we're kind of fueling our country, being able to support our allies, being able to provide economic supports to those out there that need it, showing that strength, again, to push back on China, to push back on Russia, to push back on Iran. That not just keeps world peace, but it keeps trade going, keeps everything there. The biggest example is Taiwan. Right? If you are not strong with China and China steps into Taiwan, the economy of our country is going to take a beating like you've never seen. Because all the chips are coming out of Taiwan. We're going to make a transition there, right? This new CHIPS Act, which was good idea, horribly implemented by the Biden administration. We're going to transition over and start getting more of our chips made here. But we're always going to need Taiwan. And they're our friend. They're our ally, right? Biden is weak on that. There's no question about it. China loves that Biden's weak, right? China is waiting for America to falter on the international stage so they can drive into Taiwan, which would drastically affect our economy here. That's just the nature of the beast right now. That's just the nature of our situation. Now, again, we'll transition and become more independent with a lot of the technologies that are being developed. But at the end of the day, you need to support your allies. You need to have good international economic strength kind of to back up our position to make sure there is peace in the world.
So my last question here is my age group is struggling with the invisible tax of the inflation. And it affects everything just both long term in the sense of someone wanting to buy a house because they just can't save up, or just the short term in groceries. What is Haley's plan to start off when she gets if she gets into the White House?
So a couple things. So let's talk about inflation just generally for a second. Inflation was at 5%, and then it moved to 10%, and now they're saying, well, it's only 5%. Isn't that 6%? Isn't that great? Does anyone think that inflation's at 6%? By the way, are things only 6% more expensive than they were? No, that is bull. I'm in the fourth term. I tend to shoot my mouth off, but we're in a brewery, so I'll be nice. Absolutely not. That is bogus, right? How they calculate inflation in the first place is completely bogus. It is the worst tax on the poor you can have. Inflation is nothing but a tax on the poor. Because guess what? And you're seeing it today. The wealthy people can afford housing. They can afford going to McDonald's and paying $30 to feed their family. A lot of people can't, right? A lot of people used to get that 12. What used to be 12 is now $30, right? Low-income families can't. And it's not just McDonald's, it's putting gas in the car, it's bread, it's whatever it might be, right? The demand, I mean, we have the lowest poverty rate in the country here in New Hampshire. We're blessed. I mean, it's hard. We work very, very hard to have the lowest poverty rate in the country.
That didn't come
No,
overnight.
that did not come overnight. But we work very hard to create those opportunities. But again, we don't tax people, right? We try to manage inflation as best we can. The answer to inflation, it's a couple-fold. Number one is energy, right? As energy costs go up, it costs more to ship your product here. It costs more to make your product. It costs more to get the plastics or whatever it is. So being energy dominant and having the opportunity to do that drives inflation down, drives affordability for all Americans, specifically the lower and the middle class Americans. So again, one thing has a very direct relation to the other. Regulation. The Biden administration regulations, you don't see them. Congress didn't vote on them. But they are all there. This EPA administrator is off of his frickin' gourd. There is no sense of science at the EPA right now. They are on a social mission. I've had these discussions with them. We look at the data. The data says this. The toxicology says that. Doesn't matter. We came in with a plan to do this, and we're going to do it. Those types of regulations make businesses stop in their tracks. They slow and halt development altogether, which again brings the economy to a grinding halt and drives things to be much more expensive than they need to be. Right? It's not just clean air and clean water and the EPA. The EPA is driving environmental regulations through the roof. I was an environmental engineer. I mean, I spent my career, before I got into the political thing, my career was handling this and cleaning up hazardous waste sites and specializing in this stuff. And you could always work with the EPA and manage through it and all that sort of thing. This EPA isn't even looking at data, numbers, or science. But the regulations that they're driving that Congress never even sees are a huge part of the inflation factor that we're dealing with today.
So I'm going to open up the floor for the governor on behalf of Ambassador Haley. We're trying to keep the topic specifically to the economy, but if you have any questions, please just raise your hand. I know you guys have questions.
Sure. So, Governor, looking as someone who's young, looking towards the future, one of the things I'm starting to plan for now is retirement, so that I can be able to retire and hopefully not to work myself to death when I'm 70, 80 years old. How does a Haley presidency look like in terms of Social Security?
Sure.
Make sure this money that's already being taken out of my paycheck each week is actually going to come back to me.
Sure. So how old are you? Can I ask?
25.
25 and you're thinking about retirement. God bless you. Seriously, I mean, that's a rare thing, and that's awesome. I think it's awesome.
Well, now you have to think about it now.
You have to. You absolutely have to. I think Nikki Haley has the best answer on the Social Security issue, and I don't think they promote it enough. Social Security, as a lot of folks know, it is going bankrupt. It is going bankrupt. It will be bankrupt in 10 years. Okay? That's what the math says. That's a fact. The law says the benefits are being cut. As soon as it goes bankrupt, benefits get cut 23%. That's existing law. Trump says he won't touch it. I'm not doing anything about it. DeSantis says I'm not doing anything about it. Biden says I'm not doing anything about it. They brag about doing nothing about it because they're going to be gone when it happens, right? Nikki's the only one that says, look, here's the plan. We have a plan to do this so the folks getting benefits today, we don't have to cut your benefits, right? We can stop that, right? She wants to go after Social Security to fix it, not go after it in a negative way. But let's jump on this thing and fix it before it's crisis time, which is great. The retirement age is, what is it for Social Security? 62?
Yes.
Right? 62.
65,
something like
actually. My
65,
dad is
yeah.
supposed to be
65,
retiring.
right? So that retirement age has been in place for 40 years when people only live to like 75, right? So she's saying, well, of course we have to move that. I mean, you can't have a retirement age and just ping it to life expectancy, right? Just start having it move towards life expectancy and all that sort of thing. DeSantis, you know what DeSantis' answer was on this? Well, life expectancy went down right after COVID by a half a year, so that's just that's the dumbest thing that's the worst escape of trying not to deal with what I believe is one of America's biggest financial crises, Medicare and Social Security. Medicare will go bankrupt right before Social Security. So in terms of retirement, if you're Two things. Save privately. I mean, there's no doubt you should all be doing that. Roth IRAs. I mean, really, if you max out that Roth IRA, it hurts a little today, you're a millionaire in 30 years. And you can have that nest egg. But for those who will depend on Social Security, it has to be repaired. And no one's willing to do that but her. Yeah, it means you're not going to retire at 65, maybe you retire at 68 or 70 or something like that. But given that we're all living so much longer, that's totally normal and totally expected. So the fact that none of this has been touched, I mean, literally Congress has been so scared and petrified to do it for so long. Like anything in Congress and in the leadership we've had lately, let's just wait till the train goes off the rails until we decide how to fix the engine. That makes no sense, right? So the fact that she's willing to do it, has a plan to do it, so seniors don't lose anything today. We make small changes on the 20-somethings, which is totally understandable and expected. And the most important, it becomes solvent again, right? And folks can... Promises made, promises kept. I believe that. I think Nikki has said that as well. If we promise you a benefit, we got to stick to it. But again, for those younger folks who are just coming into the system, there's no reason we shouldn't be making changes that probably should have been made 20 or 30 years ago, but no one had the political courage to do it.
Any other questions for the governor?
So obviously to have a strong American presence, as you mentioned, there needs to be a strong economic presence internationally. And as we know at this point, China, although still a primarily regional power, has been starting to penetrate the markets of even the closest allies of the United States,
Sure.
Canada, France, Germany.
Yeah.
How does the United States regain or continue to assert its dominance in its closest ally?
Sure. So a couple things there. So, well, one, I'm going to go back to energy a little bit because, especially in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, we have our issues with Saudi Arabia, of course, but we also rely on Saudi Arabia for oil. If we're letting Saudi Arabia just go gangbusters, they're cutting deals with China now. That's a scary thing. China is really asserting itself into the Middle East, specifically in the energy market, which is why we have to be ready to respond to that financially. I'm going to give you a quick example. Small island of Cape Verde. Cape Verde is just off the coast of Africa. It's a great little island. It used to be part of Portugal, but it's independent now. I got a call from the Defense Department. I think it might have been state. I'm not 100% sure exactly who made the first call. And said, look, a lot of states have partnerships. National Guards have partnerships. Right now ours is with El Salvador, where our National Guard works with their military. We provide some training and assistance, and it's kind of like a sister state thing. They said China is just built a university for Cape Verde. They are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into this tiny island nation. They're an ally of the United States, but they're effectively inserting themselves to the point where they'll control the economy. And there are places they've done this hundreds of times across the world where they'll make these giant investments into areas that might be poor in African nations. They do it a lot. When those nations can't pay the Chinese back, they say, okay, we'll just take your raw materials. So that's how they control the cobalt market or whatever it is. Well, what they're doing in Cape Verde is they want to take over the port because now they will have an Atlantic presence, a military Atlantic presence right in the Atlantic, right off of our eastern seaboard. So they called and said, hey, would you guys become a partner nation, a state to a nation partnership? Would your National Guard do this with Cape Verde? We said, absolutely, and I signed the agreement with the president about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And now we're partnering and we're getting in there. But this is an example of, you wouldn't think of Cape Verde, what does that matter to us, whatever. They are making all of these little investments all over the place. Canada as well. Canada, I think, has a better understanding of what they're doing. They're less susceptible to a lot of the economic, I don't want to call it bribery, but the game that they're playing economically with some of these poorer nations. So America's kind of waking up. I think we've woke up a little too late to it. Another reason I get behind Nikki and understanding these international issues, what she's done at the UN. No one has the understanding of international issues like she does that's running for president. Not even close. Not Trump. Trump just kind of took his charge from Mike Pompeo at state and Nikki Haley at the United Nations. They understand the very nuanced details of all of these very complex issues internationally. Trump has really no understanding of it all, right? Trump's out there talking about his business dealings with China. Oh, that's actually a problem, if anything, right? It gives you actually an inverted perception of what the crisis might be. Same with Russia, right? Calling Putin his friend and all this kind of stuff. Putin's no friend of anybody. Like Putin thinks, Putin and China very strongly believe America is their enemy. Absolutely. So we're going to have economic ties to those folks, but we better start treating them like the way they see them as the way they see us. So as we make a lot of these transitions, that absolutely have to happen. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there's no doubt we have to keep making and counteracting these investments, specifically that the Chinese are making overseas, because they're doing it for military reasons, controlling natural gas, controlling oil, controlling the raw materials needed to make batteries, and as we begin to electrify the world.
So I'm going to transition over to our next speaker, Chris, from the ACC. Thank you, Governor, for speaking with us.
I made it.
Oh, 1/3 done.
All right, there we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Virginia. Governor, let's talk about a topic, the environment, which is
I thought we were going to go to the Patriots. Gerard Mayo, the new coach of the Patriots. We're all very excited. So,
right.
Okay.
It's a notoriously easy topic for Republicans to talk about, right? And I want to go back to the first GOP debate in Milwaukee in August because one of our members actually had the opportunity to ask the only audience question, which was a question about climate change. And what really stood out, obviously, was that Ambassador Haley was the only candidate on stage that said climate change is real, but here's how we do it in a conservative way. And I find that really interesting because what you were talking about just before this in the section about the economy is that energy really is the lifeblood of an economy. You can't have a climate agenda that just destroys the economy because then you're trading one thing for the other and it clearly doesn't work. Could you talk a little bit about how Ambassador Haley looks at the environmental and this climate issue from a conservative perspective that grows the economy while tackling the problem?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and again, the fact that this climate stuff has gotten so political, as a Republican and a conservative and an environmental engineer, I think she and I have the same approach. First, let's look at data, right? Let's look at numbers. Let's take the emotion out of it as much as we can. The hysteria, I think there's a lot of hysteria out there. Doesn't mean we can't be concerned and make smart moves and all of that. But when there is a climate change agenda out there that starts with hysteria, the world is going to end in 12 years and all that kind of stuff, that's coming from leaders of the world that are promoting this kind of stuff. So two things, either you're massively fear-mongering, or what happens is people go, well, now I just can't believe you, because there has to be a smarter approach. So the approach is this. Again, you have to have your energy dominance and you have to transition. You have to look at what works. The quick example I'll give is, should New Hampshire, she likes the states approach, which I appreciate a lot. Should New Hampshire have the same solar standards as Arizona? No, obviously, right? That seems kind of obvious. But you have people out there saying, no, Arizona has standards that say, renewable portfolio standards that say we're going to have this much of solar, so we should as well. No, it's snowing and it's cloudy a lot of the time and it's a whole different thing. Do we have opportunities in hydro that places like Arizona might not have? Yes, we do, right? Especially micro hydro or macro hydro out of Canada, right? Okay, so let's be smart. I'm a huge believer in hydro because that has been proven to be so economically viable. We can tap into it. It's some of the cheapest energy on the planet. Is just north of our border in Canada, right? So let's bring that down and utilize it. Geothermal, we tried geothermal. I worked on personally a lot of geothermal projects myself. Still fairly expensive, works in some isolated areas. Okay, so let's make that available. Let's not mandate it on everybody, right? Let's not force. I mean, the other thing I see is, this whole, when you go to the electrification piece, specifically on the economics. Well, we're gonna electrify, as we're gonna keep electrifying and electrifying. There are certain things that we're never going to 100% electrify. All that electricity has to come from somewhere, and you can't electrify this country if you're not willing to build a transmission line, because you have to get the electrons from A to B, and you're not willing to build a power plant, because you have to create the electrons, right? So everyone is looking at how many charging stations can you put in? Okay, but you're not letting me build more transmission lines to plug those cars in. And California is the ultimate example, right? Of going super hard, super fast, because a policy sounded politically good, but they had no infrastructure to develop it. Right? So, hey, we want everyone has to buy an electric vehicle, but by the way, don't charge your electric vehicles between the hours of 10 and 3 or whatever it was that they came out with. It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. And it's just data. So we're going to get there. We're going to transition. But you have to have all the infrastructure pieces in place to make it economically viable, or the whole thing starts to really fall apart. I don't know if that answered the heart of your question, but making sure that when you're talking about electrifying, when you're talking about batteries, when you're talking about being, generating power in a more environmentally friendly way, first, avoid the extremism, because that just turns people off, and it's not based in reality. I'm a big believer that the fix to climate change, if you will, the fix to any environmental issue, is you go harder on better technologies, right? When we had a pollution problem in America in the 50s and 60s, and automobiles were polluting, and LA was smog city, smog every day of the year, or whatever it was. They didn't ban cars. That would have been stupid. You know what they did? They put money and they invented the catalytic converter, right? They invented better technologies in the vehicles to get better, cleaner air. When power plants were putting out, all this smoke and smog and all that kind of stuff out of the power plant stacks, they said, well, we're not going to stop creating electricity. We invented better scrubbers and better technologies to go on that. And those are some short-term costs, to be sure, but allows you the whole system to keep going. When you have this new process of, well, coal power plants are bad, so just shut them all down, that's where you get into real crises. And again, who does it hurt the most? Low-income families, right? Inner-city families, right? That sometimes don't have all these other economic opportunities that other folks have. And so these left-wing progressive policies are crushed because things get so expensive they literally can't afford to heat their homes or put gas in their cars, or put food on the table, because ultimately that food costs so much just to ship it across the country. So those types of policies drive inflation, crush lower and middle income families economically, and then it's so much harder to keep making those arguments, right? Because no one's buying them.
Yeah, and it seems to me like what you said, the debate's been stuck between extremes, right? Like on the one hand, you do have hysteria, and that really delegitimizes the debate, because when you have people like Al Gore making extreme predictions 20 years ago that should have happened by now, and they haven't.
Yeah, according to Al Gore, we're all dead.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, literally, like he thought we were done for.
Right.
Or the world was going to get so overpopulated we weren't going to be sustainable, by the year of 2010.
Right, and so that's one extreme of the climate debate, and I think people are starting to see more and more through that. But I think we also have another extreme to the climate debate, which is that there is no problem,
right,
that this is all just a hoax. And I think when a lot of young people, and obviously this is an event catered to young people on the right, young people look at that, including young conservatives, and they're not convinced by that.
Not at all. No, I think young people completely get climate change is real. It's something we have to tackle. And I've been arguing to my more conservative, older friends that, again, whether it's a hoax, whether they say it's a hoax or it's just not real, don't worry about it, it's all fine. No way, man. We are losing the vote of younger Americans primarily over the environment. Like, that's the number one issue. Number two is the abortion issue, but even that is getting to be not as much of an issue because it's more state-driven now. Mm-hmm. But nationally, we're getting crushed and losing folks in droves because we're not addressing this in the right way.
Well, and the other thing is that the way you approach climate and environmental issues to the next generation has become a bit of a heuristic. It's like, do you trust basic science, right, basic facts? Like, do you care about our future? So if you tell a young person, look, it's all a hoax, then their instinct is like, well, why would I believe you on all these other issues?
Exactly. No, that's right.
But something you said as well, which I found really fascinating, is, okay, like we say this is real, we need to do something about it, acknowledge the problem, but then how do we go from there? And I think that's an opportunity for conservatives and Republicans to step into that and talk about what you were just talking about, that it's not about regulating, it's about innovating.
Right.
And that the best way that we can do this is by allowing ourselves to build things.
That's right.
To empower entrepreneurs, to reshore supply chains back to the United States rather than relying on adversaries like China. Could you talk a little bit about how Ambassador Haley looks at those issues and how we can unleash the American clean energy economy?
Sure. So first I'm gonna pick on somebody because that's the way I always start. That was a joke. Let's look at what Obama did, right? So Obama came out and said, hey, we want more solar power, and he put hundreds of millions of dollars, even, Solera, I think, was the big example, $500 million of your money behind Solera, bankrupt in 2 years. Because he wasn't investing in better technologies. That's where the government should be creating opportunity. We're going to invest in the research and development. We're going to incentivize, whether it's the universities or private industry, to do the R&D part, to be more efficient, cheaper, better technologies, so that the private sector can go buy the solar panels from Solera, or the states can provide subsidies at their own, manageable levels, to help buy those solar panels. When you just start pounding hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars into companies because it sounds good, again, the research and development, I think, is where the country and where Nikki has I think, understanding the value of your dollar can go the furthest. Another example is wind. I love the idea of offshore wind, because we have some of the strongest winds in the country just off the shore in the Gulf of Maine. We call it the Gulf of Maine because we got to name something after Maine, right? We give them lobsters and wind. But right off there are some of the most, highest potential for offshore wind. So I started pushing it, and conservatives said, well, what are you doing? I said, we're not building anything yet. Let's start the studies. Let's look at the technologies. Let's do the research. Let's know the data. Let's understand what we're dealing with. How much will this cost? All the different pieces that have to come into play before we say, oh, here's $1 billion. We're just going to go do it. So what we found is, it might be viable someday, but the costs haven't come down like we anticipated, because after the inflation issues, everything's more expensive. To the point where even the companies that were doing the projects, the developers, Eversource is now, for example, that's our local energy company, has said, yeah, we're out of this game. The costs are just way too high. It doesn't make economic sense. Maybe down the road. Now, we're not saying yes or no whether we're going to do it. We're still in our study and engineering phase, and we're going to keep doing that. But that doesn't mean when we get to the end, we just hit a switch and we're going to do it. At least we'll know what we're doing, how we're doing it, where the data is. Rhode Island has their offshore wind project coming on board. It's incredibly expensive. I mean, what those taxpayers and the ratepayers now have to pay for the next 20 years in energy for that offshore wind is really, really expensive. You have the issue of natural gas, right? New England's at the end of the line, right? We rely a lot on natural gas. Almost every bit of natural gas comes through New York, right? It comes up through a giant pipeline through Albany, New York. Albany, New York, in case you haven't heard, is now like trying to ban gas stoves and ban gas everything. Scares the heck out of everybody in New England, because if they started turning that valve down, we're screwed. I mean, really, we don't have another place to get. In fact, it got so expensive last year to bring it in out of the Marcellus Shale, it was cheaper to buy natural gas from Europe, right? Which is astounding, because they were having trouble buying it from Russia, right, because of the war. But it was really cheaper for us to have to bring in natural gas from Europe. So the whole point is, we're all interdependent on each other. I think the government can be helpful there in trying to, whether it's new pipelines or whatever it needs to be while we make these transitions. Our overall dependence on baseload generation, whether it's a power plant or whatever it might be that uses natural gas, Seabrook, any of these, I'm going to get a little wonky here. On the hottest summer day right now, New England, because we're all tied together in New England, will use about 23,000 kilowatts. That used to be closer to 30,000, right? So our overall need on baseload generation has come down, because we're getting smarter. We're electrifying more. We're not putting such demands on the system. We're finding other ways, whether it's solar or renewables or all this. So we're doing a good job getting there. But you can't just shut the system off, right? Because the costs go through the roof, and you have brownouts, you have blackouts. People can't heat their homes and all of that sort of thing. So you got to keep investing on that infrastructure while we make the transition, not over the next 5 years, but over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And again, the federal government's opportunity there is investing in the R&D to figure out what is best. What materials should you use in that offshore wind? Are there better, more efficient materials to use in solar power? Is there a way to do solar power so we're not having to shovel off the solar cells in New Hampshire, right? And these guys have actually created. I saw this one thing. They created solar panels that actually move and clean themselves, which actually can increase the efficiency of a solar panel. Huge, especially even in the desert, because I guess they get caught in sandstorms and all that kind of stuff. They need to be constantly cleaned. So there's all these little things to make the renewables that we're bringing online much more efficient. But to challenge solar power with natural gas is effectively 98% efficient when it's running through a power plant. Solar, 12.5%, 13% efficiency. Right? So you get so much a bigger bang for your buck with natural gas. You can't just completely shut that off. But we're doing well. The data says we're trending in the right direction. So let's have the federal government help us invest in that infrastructure. And I got to go back to the power line thing, guys. It takes like 15 years to get a power line permitted in this country right now, primarily because of the EPA. No one's going to invest in a 15-year power line, right? The developers that have to put that money down, they're not going to do it. They're going to find another alternative or some other option. And that's why our system here in New England, that's why our rates skyrocketed about a year ago, because it was a crunch. It wasn't just the cost of natural gas coming in. It was a crunch on the infrastructure. So we've been able to manage that a little better, but technology is how you can best make the transition and have the federal government assist.
Yeah, and I think part of the conservative answer is what can the government do and what should the government not do, right? And I think one of the problems that you put your pulse on there was a lot of the problems we have when it comes to trying to build clean energy in this country to help bring down emissions and be more environmentally friendly goes up against this federal permitting process where it's actually the government standing in the way of reaching our goals, which I think is just a lovely irony because all of those regulations are put there in the first place by environmentalists and they don't want those taken out.
That's right.
But I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, which obviously the ambassadors talked a lot about, which is the idea of energy dominance. And I think we've seen right now with what's happening in Europe, the importance of the United States using our domestic resources, oil and gas, and sending those to our allies and having those at home. That's incredibly important. But we also see as we go into this future where we're electrifying things, where we're moving towards clean energy, that countries like China are building their own form of energy dominance. They dominate critical mineral supply chains. They dominate EV battery supply chains, wind and solar, and all these other different technologies that we're going to need in the future are almost entirely dominated by China. And so to me, and I feel like to many young conservatives, energy dominance isn't just fossil fuels. It's an all of the above energy approach where we're actually building those things here at home. We're getting the government out of the way, and we're making sure that we're not relying on China for the technologies of the future. Could you talk a little bit about how the ambassador thinks about it?
So again, I think Nikki and I share a lot of the same vision here. The example I'm going to give here is Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma produces a lot of oil. They're also I think they are the number one producer of renewable energy per capita in the country because they have wind, they have solar, they've made huge, broad advances there. Both the government has subsidized it, allows those technologies to come to fruition, but they have a terrific spectrum, more than almost any other state. And it's a very red state. It's a very conservative state, very, very Republican state. But they're doing it the right way. They're saying, yes, we have a lot of oil and opportunity here. We have a lot of natural gas and opportunity. But that doesn't mean we're not going to take advantage. We're going to use that energy dominance position, that leverage that we have, to take advantage to allow us to make the right investments in a better and smarter, more long-term spectrum of environmental policies. That can be shared across the country. And again, what's good for Florida, what's good for Oklahoma, it might be very different than what's opportunistic for New Hampshire and California. So if the government can help provide some of these opportunities, but let the states decide, their best path. And as much as we can, take the politics out of this. It has to be based on data. It has to be on functionality. The thing that drove me crazy when I first became governor, and I'm big on hydro, and I was trying to get hydro out of Canada, and they said, if the dam's too big, if the hydro plant's too big, it's not renewable anymore. Only small hydro is considered renewable, and you get the tax credits and the credits for renewable energy. If it's too big, we don't consider that renewable. So if I was getting renewable energy from a big dam, it's not renewable. Does that make any sense? It's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Just because it's a bigger dam doesn't mean it's less renewable. It's still the power of the river being turned to electrons to power whatever we need to electrify. So again, that's just politics getting in the way of good opportunity. So what does that mean? When we had the opportunity to invest and connect with dams, it made it less economically achievable to do that because they couldn't take advantage of things that small hydro could. Small hydro is great, but it's really expensive to maintain because you're basically maintaining 12 small dams is much more expensive to upgrade, to maintain, to keep all the systems and the parts working and the dams viable and structurally viable and all that than one big dam, right? But you could get the same energy out of both, but the small ones are renewable and the big ones aren't. That's just an example of just really bad policy. I don't know who made that decision, but it was made either by law or by rule. But okay, so it forced us to only look at small hydro. And a lot of people are getting rid of their small hydro plants. They don't want them. They're too expensive. Towns have them. They're like, we don't want to do this anymore. So they're getting out of the business of it. The state could buy that and take it over, and in some cases we do. Or private individuals own private dams and private waterways, and they sell the power back to the grid. That's great. But now a lot of those folks are saying, well, we just don't want to be in this business anymore. So a lot of those smaller ones are disappearing. So again, it's not necessarily, you don't want the state buying all the power plants. You don't want the state controlling the energy market. You want the state creating a free energy market. That's what ultimately will drive the prices down and allow us to make bigger investments into better spectrums of renewables. Again, allowing each state to kind of find their path.
Cool. We're going to go into a few quick questions from the audience.
Sure.
But before we do that, could I just get you to, in 30 or 60 seconds, just give a quick pitch on what is Nikki Haley's message to young people, including young conservatives, who care about climate change, care about the environment, they want to do it in a way that works for the economy?
Look, the answer to climate change is taking, I think, an all-of-the-above approach, being smart, making that transition, investing in those technologies, making sure those things happen. It's not climate change denial. It's not a climate change extremism. It's allowing that free market to happen as best as it possibly can, while the government can assist with research and development and making sure that each of the states, each of the regions can maximize on the renewable energy resources that best fit their needs, not just a one-size-fits-all out of Washington, D.C.
Awesome. You kept that under 60 seconds.
There we
I'm
go.
impressed. All right, questions. Isaiah.
Hi, Governor Sununu. It was very encouraging of young conservative leaders about climate to hear Ambassador Gold recognize climate change in the debate. One of the things that was also refreshing to hear was her talking about how China and India are major emitters from outside other greenhouse gases. What's her plan to get those countries and other countries around the world to also decrease emissions like she suggested?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I can probably best describe it is making sure that we have economic leverage over those countries allows us to make demands of them. So it could be a demand, just to go off topic a little bit, it could demand that they go after their fentanyl, the factories that are making the raw materials for fentanyl and drugs, shipping to Mexico and coming in here. It could be a demand that they're going to, instead of building 100, I think they did like 100 coal plants 2 years ago. China built 100 coal plants in a year. 2 a week they were putting online, right? Enough. If we have to play by international some of these international rules of clean climate, so do they. There's other demands we can make on them. I mean, I go a little far afield, but it ties into the climate and the environmental health of individuals. When you're looking at the mines and how they do mining, the child labor, the humanitarian crisis, and that all ties into the environmental crisis. Cleaning up their hazardous waste. I mean, we have our Superfund programs and we have hazardous waste sites. We all know that. But, we know how to identify them. We go after, they ignore it, completely ignore it. So if we're all going to play on this international stage of taking climate change seriously, everyone's got to play by the same rules. That's one of the main reasons she pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. Because not everyone, the rules were completely pushed against the United States, and not everyone had to live up to those standards. Not just China, but India as well. Now, India is an ally of ours, and it's great that India is an ally. But again, we have to have economic leverage to kind of start calling some of these shots on these guys. It all starts with a strong economy here, and that allows us to negotiate better deals, whether it's trade deals or whatever it is, and then insert the environmental piece that can go in it. If we're weak militarily, if we're weak economically, then we have no leverage. They're going to say, oh, you want us to shut our coal plants down? Okay, thanks for the tip. Go screw. And they're going to move on. And that's kind of how we've been treated for a lot of years. But the ability to turn that around, it has this whole domino effect of positive repercussions.
As moderator, it's my right to editorialize slightly. I'm just going to add also, I think that's where the energy dominance angles comes in, because if we're building the best and cleanest technology in the world here in the United States, we can export that to countries like China and India, and I'd much rather them buying our products and us buying their products.
Look, let's talk about oil really quick. When we drill for oil in America, we do it cleaner and more soundly than anywhere else in the world. The fact that when Biden goes and tells these countries in the Middle East, we're not drilling our oil, we want to take your oil, that's the dirtiest oil in the world. That's the most unenvironmentally sound oil in the world. Right? So that goes completely against his own philosophy. But again, he's hoping that you don't notice that. But we have very stringent regulations. I'm not saying you ignore it. Just the opposite. We put an emphasis on drilling smartly. We put an emphasis, and if you're going to do something smart anywhere in the world, do it here in America, right? Where we hold ourselves to a different standard, where we have good regulations both out of the government and self-regulation, locally. Because people, if something goes wrong, people are going to stand up and say it. But again, pushing back on the extremism is so important. It dissolves this conversation. It's so hard to have this conversation in such an important way when all people hear from the mainstream media is the climate extremists. I mean, you heard the guy today, I don't know who this kook was, saying, look, we should be looking at blowing up pipelines. Yeah, some people might get killed. That might happen. That's okay. I mean, these are the extreme environmental crusaders coming out, and they're willing to, cost people lives and all this sort of thing on their crusade. It's not smart. It's not data-driven. And ultimately, that's unfortunately the discussion that people are having about climate change and where we need to go, as opposed to what I think you guys are doing, which is smart, which is data-driven, which allows, especially conservatives, and I think smart conservatives, look at data and make those transitions, as opposed to having to play political games. Nikki doesn't play political games. Everyone else on that stage, was afraid to say anything. But, she'll tell you what it is and stand by it 100% of the time. Hey. Yeah.
You mentioned a lot about hydro.
Sure.
In my home state, in the western part of the state of Kentucky, we have 3 major nuclear centers, and they greatly reduce the cost of energy for low-income families. I just wanted to hear your take.
Sure.
More broadly,
So I'm going to give a little background. So when my father was governor back in the 80s, and when he was governor, Seabrook Power Plant came online. And I remember I was like 10 years old, and there were people in my front yard, in nuclear radiation suits, protest. The environmentalists wanted to shut down nuclear. They wanted to shut down nuclear. And now the environmentalists are like, hey, can we get some more nuclear going here? What's going on? So how things have changed, right? The challenge with nuclear, and I'm a big fan, but here's the challenge. The one new nuclear power plant that's being built in this country, it's in Georgia. It's a massive project, massively over budget, right? So for whatever reason, the costs to build these things right now are so huge, folks aren't looking to do that. Small batch nuclear is a huge opportunity. It's got its hurdles. People are going to have their tentative, be afraid of it and all that. It's got to be tested out. But some of the small batch stuff, it's safer, it's smarter. You can have small batch plants that just power a small town here or a factory there. That's the future of nuclear, I think. America, and again, that's where the government is putting a lot of money into the research and development. I don't think we're going to get there for about 50 years. I think it's going to take, not that we're doing nothing for 50 years, but I don't think you're going to see it really out there at a level where it's becoming a much more significant contributor to the grid than we see today. But it's definitely part of our future, right? Fusion is going up. The amount of fission that we're doing is going down. We'd all like to see fusion really become a reality. And again, it is. It's getting better. The opportunity for that is getting better and better. When I was in high school, I was a real geek. I went to MIT, and it was a real geeky thing. But fusion can't happen. It's not going to be real. It's not going to be real. 20 years later, it's very real. Right? And 20 years from now, it's going to be even more real. It's going to be safer. It's going to be smarter. It can have, net positive outputs. So I just keep going back to huge opportunities there. Today, the costs are astronomical, but I think as you go to the smaller stuff and with some better technologies 20, 30 years from now, that's a huge opportunity, specifically for New England, I think. We have only 2 nuclear power plants left in all of New England, Seabrook and the one in Connecticut. I forget what Millstone. They've got rid of Plymouth. They got rid of the Yankee power plant in Vermont, and it was mostly driven on politics. They needed upgrades. Don't get me wrong. They needed upgrades. They needed to be fixed and cleaned up and all that. But you can do that. You don't have to just shut it all down. But everyone had it in the mindset, just shut it off. And when you're all together in New England and you're at the end of the line for natural gas, and last time I checked, no one's found any oil yet underneath. We're really at the mercy of everybody else, but nuclear allows us to do it. The other big piece with nuclear is the waste. I'm a has waste guy. You got to get Yucca Mountain going or some solution there. But right now, every nuclear power plant is its own giant natural nuclear waste repository because that waste has nowhere to go. Right? It's just sitting there. That's not a smart thing to do. You can move nuclear around on train. You can't bring it by road. That's a problem. So how we manage our waste stream is a huge part of how we grow the opportunity.
And speak of a technology that's been held back by regulation. Final question, then we'll go to the final topic.
Hey.
So I just wanted to ask a question, and actually it kind of doesn't have too much to do with climate change, more about drugs and I guess you were talking about fentanyl a little bit earlier. So I know that there's been a lot of problems
Yep.
trying to cover PTSD, and sometimes when they try and get that legalized, that therapy, it sometimes conflicts just because there's people who are worried about fentanyl. But I
Sure.
was gonna ask, what would you say is the best way to try and approach, legalizing things that might be good for people like veterans or people who have PTSD?
Yeah, so look, most states in New Hampshire, if we've legalized marijuana for medicinal use and medical use. You can get your medical marijuana card and all that. And I think a lot of states have taken that approach. I don't know the exact number of them, so there's opportunities there to be sure. This full-blown, I think 26 states have legalized recreational marijuana at this point. I know we're in the live free or die state. We're the only state in about 1,000 miles that has not done it. I would challenge that we're the only state that doesn't see skyrocketing fentanyl deaths. And I'm not saying one is a direct cause of the other, but what we're doing with our system is working. I mean, the rest of the country's gone up 60% with fentanyl deaths in the past 7 years. We're the only state where since 2017 every year has been below that, right? So if you're going to legalize it, you better understand the ramifications. If you go beyond marijuana, you do what like Oregon is doing. What a freaking disaster that is. That is really bad, and I feel terrible for Oregon right now. I really do. It's not just the issue of legalizing the drugs. It's all the other negative domino effects that get fallen from that, right? It drives so many other problems, unfortunately. So I know that the state of New Hampshire is looking at it, and one thing I said is, okay, well, I don't like the idea, but if it's going to become inevitable, there's a responsibility to me to create the best system possible. The way Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont does it is terrible. They all have massive problems. I would never agree to any of those systems. There's a smart way to do it. Keep it away from kids. Don't let these marijuana miles and pot corners that sprout up everywhere. Those are really bad for towns. So we can control and manage a lot of that. So if the legislature were to pass something smart, I could see ourselves doing it. But when you go beyond the marijuana stuff, and every state that has gone beyond it, every governor, and I talk to all the I get along with all the governors, maybe not Gavin anymore, but he's especially on the issue of climate, of environmentalism, he's an absolute fool. I mean, and he's been one of the worst brands of being aggressive on going after climate change. He's actually his own worst enemy because he's such a bad manager. He doesn't want to look at data. He does everything on politics, and it all bites him. But governors talk, and on the issue of legalizing drugs, no governor that has legalized drugs, anything beyond marijuana, they're all furious with it. It causes such problems for them. So it is a huge warning sign. Most states that have legalized marijuana, almost none of them go to the legislature. I think there's only one or two governors in the country that have ever legalized marijuana. They all go to a ballot initiative in November. That's how it gets done, because politicians are actually smart enough to know we shouldn't be doing this, but the people want it, right? And so you're going to get I call it big tobacco 2.0. That's the legalized marijuana industry. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they do all this huge marketing campaign. What's the big deal? It's just pot. No big deal. So people end up voting for it, and it creates a wealth of problems. I think if we do it, we can be smarter about it here.
I really like how you turned the question about fentanyl into
the environmental side to stick it to Gavin.
Dig on Gavin about climate change. Cool. We'll go into the final topic, but thank you.
Thank you, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, Governor, how are you?
I am great.
Thank you.
What's next?
So I'm a student at UNH, and I think a lot of the college students in the room and the recent college grads can agree with one thing, and that is college is just too high right now, the cost to attend college. And so, obviously...
You can blame Bill Clinton for that one. We can talk about that.
All right. Canceling the debt is obviously not the right solution, because you're just going to continue the problem. What would Ambassador Haley's plan be to reduce the cost of college and make it a more affordable option?
So let's understand why the cost of college has skyrocketed even well beyond inflation for the last 20, 25 years, right? So two things happened. One, the government took over the student loans, right? The market for loans became... so when the government took it over and said, well, anyone can get a loan for any college for whatever they want, all of a sudden all the universities said, oh, so I can jack my prices up and these kids are still going to go borrow more money to come to my school and pay me? Sure. So it was a way, whether it was intentional or not, I think some people on that side of the decision were smart enough to realize, well, this is a way to funnel massive amounts of money into the college and university system because they understood that was politically advantageous for Democrats. But all of a sudden, colleges had no incentive to control their prices because anybody could borrow any amount of money for anything they wanted. So number one, you have to reinstill a free market back in there. I can't speak for Nikki on this. I haven't spoke to her directly. But conceptually, instilling that free market, allowing more people, other folks other than just the government, to have control and have an opportunity to provide some of these loans at more realistic rates. On the private side, again, you're not going to... so there's another aspect that happened, especially on the public university side. So as these costs, not the costs, but yeah, the cost to go to college went up, also the demand from the states to funnel more money into their public university system, right? So last year we gave, I don't know, $106 million or whatever it was to the UNH system. Other places, especially in the South, give hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So as those costs went up, that went up as well. So it was like a double whammy. They started taking your money. The government started making more interest off of you. The universities ultimately were the ones that gained and benefited. In New Hampshire, we've been able to freeze costs. I don't think we've had an increase at UNH in tuition for 5 or 6 years. They hit you with other fees and stuff like that, which stinks, to be sure. But I'm not saying you limit the opportunity, but the opportunity, I think, on the public side is really big. And we've created this culture, if you will, where everyone's fighting to get into these more elite private universities and all that sort of thing. Keene State's a great example. We have availability at Keene right now, right? Why should we be making that more expensive? We should be driving, again, more. It's that economics 101, supply and demand curve, right? We should be driving more people into Keene at a lower cost. But again, you have to appreciate there's a free market in that. There's no free market right now. And all of this was designed, intentionally or not, to drive more of your money, the government's money, and government control over those loans. Now they're going to say, well, we'll just get rid of $10,000 of your... That's crazy, man. So now all of a sudden the kids that didn't get to go to college have to pay for your loans? Talk about a revolution in this country. $10,000. Why not 20? Why not 500? What's 10,000? That's just some random arbitrary number they threw up for purely political reasons. And to your point, does nothing to solve the problem. It's just a Band-Aid, right? And by the way, the worst thing you want is the government paying for college. See, when the government pays for something, they control it, right? They're going to completely control it. So the quality goes down. Government doesn't do anything in high quality unless it's the military and a few other things. They just don't. Right? You don't want government-run schools, but that's federal government-run schools. State government-run is okay because, again, as a voter, as a constituent in your state, you have much more say on the dollars going in, on the curriculum there, and all of that. When Washington starts controlling something, they don't care. They do not care what you think. And if you become beholden to them on the dollars, and we're already a little bit there, then they're going to ultimately have a say in what kind of education is given, the quality, the variety, and the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to go off that free market and stuff like that, obviously college isn't the best option for everybody. And
right.
So we're seeing
right.
an increase in trade schools and stuff like that, especially in New Hampshire with the workforce readiness program. Has Ambassador Haley kind of discussed her plans and try to encourage stuff like that?
Every town hall she does, she talks about trade schools, right? Talks about rebuilding the people that build America and the skills that it takes to build this country. Whether it's not just, this weird stigma happened in the 90s and the early 2000s where, it wasn't good to go and get an electrician's degree or a plumber's degree or know how to do carpentry. My plumber makes a hell of a lot more money than I do, and I'm the governor, right? And you're a plumber, it's not a job, it is a career. You're never going to want for work. I wish I had those skills, right? So we got to break ourselves of that stigma and allow those opportunities. So when my philosophy, and I think she shares it, is my job is to make sure when you're 18 years old, you have a world of opportunity. Maybe it's a trade school, maybe it's you've already gotten a certificate, maybe you want to go on to college or community college, maybe you want to join the military. It's not for me to decide. It's not for the government to narrow your choices. It's up for us to expand those choices and to make sure not just when you're 18, but back when I think workforce development starts in the 6th grade. I'm a big believer in that. There's another thing Nikki talks about, coding, right? The best thing you can do, and we were very aggressive on this in New Hampshire, is make sure everyone has an opportunity to learn coding as early as the 1st grade. And you can do it, right? You want to solve poverty in this country? Make sure everyone knows how to code, right? Because there are literally, whatever it is, 2 million coding jobs, high-paying coding jobs available today, and even more down the road, right? So you want to get yourself out. That's an easy skill. It really is. It's especially for kids, right? Kids can learn languages so much better. They have all these synaptic advantages that adults do when it comes to language. And the way we can teach it now is so much simpler than when I did it was like C++, Fortran. It was hard. You had to learn. But it's a whole different ballgame now. So to bring that type of technology and opportunity as early as the first or second grade, which we're doing in New Hampshire, or allowing 6th and 7th graders to take some of those tech classes. They could be carpentry or plumbers or working on cars or whatever they want to do, right? Get them excited about school because you're giving them a chance to do something cool and fun and interesting as opposed to math, science, social studies. That's all fine. But you gotta the opportunity to get those skills earlier and keep kids more interested in school and more engaged in that process is absolutely huge. So she talks about that in every one of her town halls. And that, when you get to 18, now you're saying, I got the world at my fingertips. So I know we only have a limited time, but this is a great story. I think his name was Rick. So I met Rick. He was this close to dropping out. He was 16. He was going to drop out. I actually met him through his guidance counselor. I happened to be at the school, and he said, hey, would you talk to this one kid? And he just wants to meet you. I said, of course. So we're touring around the high school. The guidance counselor who I knew personally, brought this kid over, and we just started chatting. He's like, and he's like, yeah, I'm out of here. Nice meeting you. I'm out of here. I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, I'm going to drop out. This just isn't working for me. And what we did is, I said, hold on. We made sure not only he got an opportunity to program within his school, but we got him interning at one of the manufacturing facilities. It was up in Rochester. And he loved it. He absolutely loved it. So he ended up staying in school, graduating. At 18 years old, he was making $52,000. He got a job right away because he had been interning at the factory. It was a turbojet factory. He's making 18 years old. He's making $52,000 a year. He brings his girlfriend on board, and now she's making, I think, she was like a year behind him. So, point is, they left at 18. They didn't go to college. They didn't build up all his college debt. They're making an absolute fortune. I started bringing him with me when they tour high schools. And he'd drive in. He was like, I'm an 80s guy. Maybe this is why I connected with him. So he gets a Camaro, which is a very 80s car, right? But I would make sure he would drive, him and his girlfriend would come with me to talk to some of these high school seniors and drive his Camaro up and park it right in front. And it was a hot shit car, to be sure. And his whole point was, I was going to walk away from, but look at this opportunity I had. And I didn't have to go to college, right? And he's still taking classes on the side and stuff. He said, nobody had told me that this opportunity was right there. So one of the biggest challenges we have is breaking that stigma and allowing kids to appreciate the opportunities that might be right in front of them and they don't even know it, right? But man, so many folks in our traditional school system are stuck in this, this is another real crisis. We judge, we try not to do it here in New Hampshire, but most of the country judges high schools on how many kids go to college. They're still stuck in this old-fashioned metric. So the counselors and the career advisors are pushing a lot of kids to college or try to go to college and pay for expensive college and get the student loan so their numbers will look good. But that might not be the best path for you. So allowing some of those, that it's not accountability. That metric is a flawed metric. And allowing schools to have better metrics to determine success. The success is based on the individual success. Are they successful? Are they happy? Do they have a job? Are they independent? All of these. Do they have soft skills? Challenging the traditional education system to look at the new metrics in a different way to determine success actually creates a lot of opportunity for these kids going forward. I think, again, she gets that, right? She's a numbers person. The other big thing on education, and I just have to interject it just because I don't want to miss the opportunity, she and I both agree vehemently on one of the best opportunities for education is sending it back to states. You have a Department of Education in Washington that doesn't know you and doesn't care about you at all. They don't. But they're mandating all this funding and all this programming that has nothing to do with New Hampshire, nothing to do with Massachusetts, nothing to do with California. It has to do with some congressman somewhere put this mandate in, and God knows what state it is, but now we all have to follow the same rule. No. The way you get opportunity in education is you send the rules, the regulations, the funding, all back to the states. Because Maura Healey in Massachusetts knows what her education system needs more than Washington does. Gavin Newsom, as foolish as he is, and so many things. Believe it or not, California knows what they need, right? Why should they have to follow this one-size-fits-all out of Washington? We sure as heck know what we need in terms of the opportunities we can create. So decentralizing the federal Department of Education to allow these things to flourish at the state level. And what happens? You almost create a competition. States, again, get known for their opportunities that they're creating. And competition creates better results, better exchange of ideas, higher levels and higher standards. Allowing that free market between states to happen only happens if you decentralize the federal Department of Education and allow these answers. And by the way, if your system isn't working for you in New Hampshire, you go vote the people out. I don't like that policy. We're going to get new leadership in there. You can go vote for a new president, but nothing's going to fundamentally change within the Department of Education, right? Unless you get somebody that says, no, this is your education path. This is your family's path. You should have more say at a state level. That's an amazing empowerment that I think Nikki's trying to bring to the table.
Awesome. You kind of touched on, with that answer, my next question, which was going to be about school choice.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah.
the EFA loans.
I had to jump in there just in case you didn't ask about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's really all the questions that I have, so I'd like to open it up to
Sure.
everyone else. Back there.
Thank you, Governor. So you talked about how college isn't necessarily the best path for everyone. I think one big problem in society today is that a lot of jobs require
Yes.
Yeah. It's not needed. Obviously, there's like lawyers and doctors that really need education, but a lot of employers are kind of using like a degree as a signal to get, I guess, better candidates, quote unquote. What do you think is maybe the role of
Yeah.
government in helping solve?
So a couple things. So at the state level in New Hampshire, we basically set the old school requirements for a job. Like if you wanted to work at the Department of Administrative Services, you need 2 years of this and this kind of expertise. We created all these flexibilities so those managers could bring in really, really good people, right? I mean, the argument is, Bill Gates and Elon Musk could never get a job anywhere because they didn't go to college, they didn't have a degree, so they wouldn't qualify, they'd be dismissed too quickly. So yes, we try to lead by example, and we're breaking down a lot of those barriers. One of the amazing benefits, I would say, in this really tight labor market, right, where unemployment is extremely low, is employers are really bending, I won't say bending their rules, but they are adjusting for the most part in the free market. I really want doctors to go to college. Lawyers can go to college all they want, they're still idiots. Doctors, no, I'm just kidding. They're wonderful, wonderful, smiling vipers. So some things are obviously going to need a degree, that's for sure. But where they can provide flexibility, I believe they are for the most part. I think a lot of folks are understanding that, a lot of folks, they just want people in the door. And if I can't bring you in the door because you applied for a job and you didn't qualify, but clearly it'd be great to have you here, I think employers, because they're so desperate for work, are re-examining a lot of their own things. So again, it's kind of that free market of choice. We're in that transition. I think we'll keep, for the past 2 years, we'll transition probably another 2 or 3. But the biggest crisis this country is facing is workforce, right? It's mental health. But why is there a mental health crisis? Because I don't have enough social workers and mental health professionals and experts, right? Because I don't have enough workforce. So a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are all stemming from because we don't have the people, which is why immigration reform is so important, which is, there's a whole cascade of issues that can be dealt with to help with that issue. But again, providing that flexibility on the front end is really critical.
All right, we have time for one more question. Kyle.
Mr. Governor, I wanted to ask this. As you already probably stated before, there's many coding jobs that have been developed recently with the advantage of technology. There's been a lot of small opportunity, small apartments. And many of our generations actually grown up with the digital cyber industries as it became pioneered. We're seeing the explosion of semiconductors and so forth. And eventually our children's generation beta will eventually develop the drone, AI, and cyber industries. We're literally getting tech from AI as we speak. So I want to know your thoughts on the future of the GOP and cyber industries as a
Sure.
whole. This is one that we decide between cyber conservatism and cyber liberalism.
Sure. So 2 things. Let's just talk social media in general really quick, because I always want to put my plug in. My generation invented social media. My generation doesn't have the maturity to handle social media. You guys got to fix that for us. I mean, really. And the fact that you've grown up with it and understand it and know how to use it and how we use that as a communication tool, this is the generation that's going to really figure that out, I think, for the long term. In terms of cyber, it's one of the areas where I actually think the federal government is trying to stay ahead of it as best we can. AI. This is where you do need some guidelines and some regulations, but also understand there's also going to be nefarious folks out there, in terms of how they use AI and all of that sort of thing. Cryptocurrency, that's a form of cyber. Blockchain technologies, right? We were the first state in the country, I was the first governor ever, I signed a bill on the blockchain. right? And because not just that we say, hey, blockchain's wonderful. It's okay. What pathways do we want? How do we want to use this to our advantage? But also understand we don't want it exploited or used against us, and all that sort of stuff. The issues around cyber, I think, are going to become exponentially more dangerous in about 5 or 6 years as we get to quantum computing. Quantum computing is very real. It's going to hit the mainstream market as fast as AI did, right? Remember, AI was a thing that we read about, and then all of a sudden it was just here and everywhere, right? That's going to happen with quantum computing. When that happens, security barriers are going to become, that we have, digital security barriers that we have today are going to become almost useless, right? So things that are protected digitally with digital security, quantum can break through that very, very quickly. So I think that's going to be a huge problem coming. Now, where Congress is, I talked to Kevin McCarthy about this. He would bring in these specialists and actually try to train Congress to understand these very complex issues. They're really trying to educate Congress. They're trying their best to stay ahead of it, to make sure they're providing a free market opportunity, but at the same time understanding how this can be used both domestically and internationally. I go back to the quantum. I'm going to jump into the cyber crypto a little bit, because that pertains to all this and how we use blockchain. You know, crypto was the hot thing, the hot new thing. No one really understood it, but everyone bought into it. And now, if you notice, everyone's like, whoa. I mean, Bitcoin is still moving forward and all that. It's not really based in anything. It's kind of ethereal. I think there's still a reckoning and a reconciling coming in terms of how people invest in that world, which cryptocurrencies survive, which don't, the regulations around it. I mean, Bankman-Fried, whatever his name is, you know, he's a great haircut. You have a way better haircut than he does. And he wears a lot of orange now. But that was a great, believe it or not, you know, sending that son of a bitch to jail was actually a great wake-up call to America. There's opportunity here, but we better be careful with it. But the big one I'm going to jump on a little bit is I go to quantum computing. We are right on the forefront of it, and it will make your passcodes, your 16-bit encryptions look like child's play. And so what do we do then, right? And that's important, not because they're going to get into your phone, although that you probably don't want that to happen. This is the live free or die state. They're going to get into government systems. They can get into banking. They can do anything. It's an amazingly powerful tool. And again, we need your generation to really understand this stuff, to jump on it and kind of help us stay on the forefront of it. It's scary times, but we are open to staying on the forefront, but we need that kind of level of expertise as we go.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Governor.
Yeah, appreciate it. And be careful of the robots. They're worse than the zombies, but they're all coming for you.
Well, thank you for ending on that note. Thank you all for being here. Like I said, this was the last in our candidate series, and so thank you for Governor Sununu for being here on behalf of Nikki Haley. We really appreciate it. As most of you probably know, there is a primary here next week, so definitely turn out and vote. Have your voice be heard. But for now, get home safe, and thank you again on behalf of ACC Action, New Hampshire Young Republicans, New Hampshire College Republicans. Have a great night.
Great, thank you.